Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler episode 378. Today the Amateur Traveler talks about beef and tango and Evita, which can only mean we're going to Buenos Aires.
Cathedral, got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. This episode of the Amateur Traveler is sponsored by Viator. You can find more information about tours that you can take when you go to Buenos Aires, including tango shows, sightseeing tours, and one that caught my eye, which is a gaucho day trip down to a ranch. For more information, and so that Amateur Traveler gets credit, go to amateurtraveler.com/tours. Before we get into this week's interview, I do have three news stories for you. Obviously, the biggest news this week was the crash at San Francisco of Asiana Flight 214. Two of the stories that are worth mentioning that come out of that. First of all, they're talking about the flight attendants as heroes. The cabin manager, Lee Yoon-hee, was the last person out of the burning plane and carried a child to safety. The San Francisco fire chief said of her, "She was so composed I thought she had come from the terminal. She wanted to make sure that everyone got off. She was a hero." And AP added she worked herself to put out the fires and usher passengers to safety, and all that was despite her personal injuries where she had suffered a broken tailbone. The tragically ironic story that comes out of the plane crash is apparently 3 people have died so far. One just died yesterday of serious injuries, and one of them seems to have been hit by the emergency vehicles as they were coming to the aid of the plane. We've always said that it's not air travel, but traffic that is the most dangerous part of travel. But I did not expect that would be true even if you were in a plane crash. This isn't the only news stories with flight attendants and airlines that I saw this week. The other one is a little more odd. A air hostess is suing her employer because they accused her of bringing a rat on board the plane smuggled in her underwear. Her coworkers claimed there was a lump in her clothes which looked like a live pet, and they believe they saw her feeding it. When they landed, they thoroughly searched her, but no rodents were found. She's now suing them for making it difficult for her to board international flights and refusing to let her work on domestic ones and embarrassing her in front of her colleagues. For links to all three of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Leandro Gonzalez from originally from Buenos Aires, now in Colorado, come to talk to us about his hometown. Leandro, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Why should someone go to Buenos Aires?
Well, I think, Chris, Buenos Aires is a very cosmopolitan city. Sometimes people don't even have an idea how big this city is. It's a city that has, including the metro area, about 13 million people. And I think it's a city that has options for all different kinds of travelers, from the budget backpacker to the upscale traveler. There's definitely something to do in Buenos Aires for everybody. The city has a very strong European influence. With that said, I think it has its own Latin American identity. And one of the things that is very well known about Buenos Aires is its nightlife. I think if you go out on a Tuesday night, you can just stay in a bar until like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's always going to be something open for you. So I think those might be the main reasons why people might be interested in going to Argentina. There is definitely a very interesting culture, a very strong Italian influence.
And that's the thing that I think surprises a lot of people. When we think about South America, I think a lot of people think Spanish, some Portuguese, obviously, in Brazil, and the indigenous cultures, and then you throw an Italian there, and I think people get confused. So how did that come about? What is the immigration that caused Buenos Aires to...
Well, for example, I'm 50% Italian, 50% Spaniard. And I think about 70% of the population in Argentina can track their roots back to Italy. That's a very large number, much more than Spaniards. What happened in the early 20th century, and then, of course, after World War and during World War II, many Italians, many went to the East Coast in the United States, some went to Australia, but a very large number of them, they came to Argentina. And I don't know if this has something to do with the fact that Italian might be like closer to Spanish than it is to English.
Sure, much more so.
There is definitely a very large Italian influence in Argentina that you can also see in the cuisine. Even the way we speak Spanish has a sort of like Italian intonation. I mean, people who are Spanish speakers that come from different countries in Latin America, they always say that they can tell the Italian influence that the way we speak Spanish has.
Interesting. You mentioned the European influence in the city. I've heard some say that of all the cities in South America, that Buenos Aires seems the most like a European city.
I agree with that. I think in the architecture, there is a very important French influence. Of course, Italian, like I mentioned before. A lot of people, they can track their background back to Europe. So that makes it very, very European. But with that said, I want people to know that this is Latin America. It's not Europe. And sometimes this in the past had some sort of like bad connotation for Buenos Aires. People from other places in Latin America and even within Argentina will see Buenos Aires are very European and perhaps associating some sort of like snobbiness to it. And I think I just want to make clear that Buenos Aires, although it has a very strong European influence, is definitely part of Latin America.
Well, and the reason I mention that is I think for Americans in particular, and a lot of the people who listen to our show are 70% or so North Americans, that it can be an interesting gateway city into the continent because a little less unfamiliar in some ways.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. It's a little more of a commonplace. I know that sometimes you ask the question about when you feel closer from home and away from home, and probably people traveling throughout South America might say that Buenos Aires is the closest from home that they might feel during their trip.
Excellent. Now, if you had a friend who was going to Buenos Aires, what would you recommend them see? What kind of itinerary would you lay out for them?
Well, like I said, it's a very big city, and really, as the capital city, has a lot of things to offer. So I kind of like came up with some 3 highlights that I really want to mention, and then we can just move on to the different neighborhoods of the city. There's one of the neighborhoods, it's one of the most traditional neighborhoods called San Telmo, which is in the south side of the capital city. And what's very interesting about this place is it's very strongly connected to tango. I think that's one of the things that people think about when they think about Buenos Aires.
Absolutely.
And all this like beautiful cobblestone streets, all bars that date back to the mid 19th centuries. You just get into any of these bars in the middle of San Telmo, and you feel that you went back in time like 200 years. You can see all these old hardwood floors, very interesting decorations on the walls and even on the ceilings. It really feels that you are traveling back on time. And another thing that is very interesting about San Telmo, if you're interested in antiques, there is a very fantastic, I would say, like flea market in Plaza Dorrego, which is an area within the San Telmo neighborhood. If you go there on Sundays, you can find any type of random things, whatever you can imagine. And it's a nice place to actually do something as you are visiting the neighborhood, because sometimes I feel like people think about it only about tango, and there is a lot more to see in San Telmo other than tango.
Mhm.
Then the other thing that I would recommend as a highlight is go to a soccer game. And I know Americans are not probably the biggest soccer fans, but I don't think it's about the game itself. I think it's about the colorful display that the fans put into these games, and about the rivalries from fans from one team against fans from another team. It's really a very interesting experience. I used to work as a tour guide. I actually was a manager at a hostel in Buenos Aires, and I used to take backpacker tourists to the games.
Oh, excellent.
I was always amazed about the way the fans feel their passion. And I think it's a way to really understand what soccer really means, I think, in South America as a whole, but maybe particularly in Buenos Aires.
Well, and one of the recommendations that I've heard that I thought is a good one is that when you go to someplace, see what the locals are interested in soccer, of course, being appropriate, but pick a team. Root for somebody. So who should we root for if we go down to Buenos Aires?
My team is actually in the third league now. You might not want to go see the team. The team is not really, it's outside the city limits. The name of the team is Temperley. So if you want to root for Temperley, go root for Temperley. But I think they're more traditional. The two most traditional teams in Argentina are Boca Juniors and River Plate. So most of the tourists try to go to these games, especially if you can go to a Boca Juniors against River Plate game. That will be a very interesting experience. But I guess seeing any of these teams, or whatever team you want to see within the capital city, it's definitely going to be a fun experience.
Okay, I was having a little trouble with Boca Juniors. So
Boca Juniors?
Boca as in mouth?
Boca as in mouth, Juniors, yeah.
Okay.
Boca, it's really the name of the neighborhood.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. It's called La Boca, the neighborhood, because
It's at the mouth of the river. Okay.
It used to be with the old port. It used to be in Buenos Aires, so it was the entry to the city. That was La Boca, the mouth. And
Okay.
then River Plate is on so Boca Juniors is on the southern side, usually associated with more like blue collar, the lowest classes. Historically, this changed now. And River Plate is from the northern side of the city, more like middle class, upper class type of team.
And Boca is the oldest of the neighborhoods in Argentina?
I think the oldest neighborhood is actually called Montserrat, which is right next to San Telmo. Definitely the southern neighborhoods, they're a bit older than the northern neighborhoods. So River Plate is actually older than Boca Juniors. But I think La Boca, Montserrat, San Telmo are some of the oldest neighborhoods in Buenos Aires.
Okay. The reason I asked was I know that I had read that the initial start of the city was in swampland near where the old fort is, and that it wasn't until they moved to better land away from the malaria, away from the swamp, that they changed the name of the city to Good Air, to Buenos Aires.
Yeah, which is something very interesting. I think like there's nothing about good air in Buenos Aires. And it has a lot of like traffic congestion is a big issue. I think like the road infrastructure in Argentina, although in Buenos Aires, although it's not bad and it's actually good by South American standards, it's limited. And I think it's more of a bad air rather than good air, unfortunately, right now in Buenos Aires.
Now, I interrupted you. You were giving us an itinerary. Let's get back to that.
So, and the other highlight that I have is actually taking a day trip to the Tigre Delta Islands. This is an area that is about like, I don't know, maybe 35, 40 kilometers from the capital city. Mm-hmm. And it's the end of the Paraná River that forms the delta with a bunch of islands. And you can actually spend a day trip there or perhaps even go and spend the night, you actually will have to take a train to go to Tigre. And then from Tigre, you can tell one of these lanchas colectivos, which are actually boats that they act as regular buses, and they take you to the different islands where you want to go. And all these islands, they usually have like bed and breakfast or some sort of accommodation, some sort of like boutique hotels. And you can just spend there the day and just walk around the islands because all these islands, they're not very far apart. So they're usually interconnected to bridges. And it's a very good getaway when you're tired of like being in this very intense, bustling city, and you just want to get out of it for a little while, I would highly recommend a day trip to the Delta del Tigre.
Excellent. In terms of the city, you mentioned getting in touch with sport and some of that, which I think is wonderful. Where would we go to get in touch with more of the artistic side of Buenos Aires?
Definitely the southern neighborhoods, especially like I said, San Telmo has a lot of crafts. It has a lot of this bohemian vibe associated to it. Mm-hmm. Definitely is the place to go see the milongas. So tango is the music. Milonga is dancing tango music.
Oh, okay.
So when people talk about tango, you're exclusively talking about the music. You're not talking about the dance. When you talk about the dance, you're talking about the milongas. Milongas are something that I feel that tourists should probably go at least to one. Some of them might feel very touristy. Some of them are very authentic. This is something that perhaps doing a little bit of research, I use TripAdvisor a lot for this kind of things and see what other tourists have to say about the different opportunities.
And do you have a favorite one, or do they change too quickly to be able to recommend one?
I think there is a place called El Viejo Almacén that I actually was a little bit in touch with my brother since I've been living in the States for the last 6 years. Mm-hmm. A little bit disconnected of some of the new things happening there, although I was there a few months ago. When you're not a tourist, sometimes you don't do these things. Sure. Tourists do. But I heard that El Viejo Almacén, it's a good place, and this is right in the microcentro area, which is like the central business district or the downtown area. Mm-hmm. They have a decent shop, a decent show, and this is something that you definitely can arrange with any hotel where you're staying. Even hostels set it up for you.
Now, what if somebody wanted a lesson? Would they go to the same place, or is that a different experience?
There are tango or milonga classes that you can take. There are so many places right now, Chris. Tango was kind of like, if you ask me about tango 20 years ago, it was kind of like fading away. Nobody was talking about it or just making a big deal about it. And after 2001, which is when Argentina had this very important financial crisis, mm-hmm. when actually the local currency, the Argentine peso, lost its value. That brought up a lot of tourism back into Argentina because before it used to be a very expensive destination. It's not that it's very cheap now, but before it used to be one of the most expensive places to go in South America. Bringing back tourism, people started to realize, how about tango? And they just started to commercialize tango a little more. So nowadays, if you want to take tango lessons, you can do that probably Monday to Friday, and you have like 5 to 10 or maybe even 20 different options to pick from. This is something that every single type of accommodation that you pick in the city will set it up for you, no doubt about it.
So everybody knows about tango, although apparently we've been calling it by the wrong name. What do we not know about that would really connect us even more to the Argentinian culture?
It's funny how the songs, they're usually telling stories about heartbroken men that were left by women, and it's this very sad connotation about the guys suffering.
So it's Argentinian country western music.
That's sort of, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's a kind of good way to describe it in terms of the history that they're talking about. But then what is very interesting is when you see people actually dancing the milonga, dancing the tango music, it's a very macho dance. It's very controlled by the men all the time. So I think that's a very interesting kind of like opposites that you see in between what the music is saying and the way it's being danced. I think that's a very interesting connection to make.
Anything else we would want to do to connect to the artistic side of Argentina?
There is actually a Teatro Colón. It's actually a world-class facility for opera and ballet and even classic music. And people say that the acoustics of the place are one of the best in the world. So definitely if you have a chance to stop by the Teatro Colón, It's definitely worth visiting. You can actually take tours in English and Spanish, and it has a very interesting story. It's over 100 years old. I think until they opened the Sydney Opera, it was the largest facility of its kind in the Southern Hemisphere. So it might be worth stopping by, having a look, check it out, and take the tour guide to see what they have to tell you about the history of the place.
And you mentioned history. What else would we want to do to connect with the history of Buenos Aires?
Well, with the history, I think staying in the microcentro, so the downtown area, one of the places that it's worth visiting is the Casa Rosada. Well, we have the White House here in the United States. Argentina, we have a pink house. So the house is painted in pink, and in front of it, you see Plaza de Mayo, which is the social gathering place for demonstrations and protests against the government. It was very popular after the Argentine dictatorship, people complaining about people disappearing during the dictatorship. So it has a very strong connotation of history that it dates back only to mid 70s to early 80s. And right in front of, across the Plaza de Mayo, is the Cabildo, which is the old town council, which is the place where the first assemblies took place and people started to debate about becoming independent from Spain. So in that plaza, you have a lot of history related not only to Buenos Aires, but to the entire country. And I think since we're talking about history, what we probably should do after we visit the town council and the Casa Rosada, we can take Avenida de Mayo, which is one of the main and oldest avenues in Buenos Aires, and walk all the way to the Congress Palace where the Senate is. That's about like 11, 12 blocks. And there are some interesting stops that you can do on your way there. One of the main stops is Café Tortoni, which is the oldest cafe in Buenos Aires. It dates back to the 1850s. And like I was describing before in San Telmo, the cafes, the old history that they have and what it really means for the porteño culture. Porteños are how people from Buenos Aires are called. So porteño means from the port. Because of Buenos Aires being a port city, that's the way people from Buenos Aires are being called. So you can go there, just maybe ask for a cup of coffee and just look around and see like this place where very important people used to get together, like politicians, artists, even, I don't know if you heard about Borges, the writer, used to spend time in this type of cafes. And then we can continue on our way to the Congress Palace and stop at a very interesting building called Palacio Barolo. What is very interesting about this building is that it was inspired in Dante's Divine Comedy. So the architecture is like, you won't miss, there's no sign actually saying Palacio Barolo, but you will see the building and you see like, this is the one. It actually, its height is 100 meters, which matches the number of songs or cantos in the Divine Comedy. And it has like 22 stories, which is the amount of verses that you have per canto. And you can actually go and visit it. And it has several balconies that have like very beautiful views of the capital city. So it's definitely worth seeing. There are tours offered in Spanish and in English as well. And it's something very unique. And it's broken down in 3 different sections. So hell, purgatory, and heaven. So it might be something that you might not expect to see in Buenos Aires. It's right there. And I think it's a cool thing to actually check out. And then from there, continue your way to the Congress Palace, which has this massive green dome on top of it. I think it took about like 50 years to actually complete the entire building. So since you're going on your way there, it might be worth just making it all the way to the Congress Palace. Then from there, I think probably if you're already feeling a little tired about the city, you can catch the subte, which is the metro system, which is a very good system to go around the city and just go all the way down to Puerto Madero. So Puerto Madero is this area that used to be like old warehouses. Now it has been converted into this like fancy restaurants, lofts. There are a lot of like business offices in the area, but there is a very nice boardwalk that goes along the docks. And it just makes a very nice stroll. You don't need to go into these like fancy establishments to eat, but it's a very pleasant walk and it's a little disconnected from the rest of the city. So it has a nice feeling. And right across it is the ecological reserve, which is an area that it's a marshy land full of lagoons. And what it's nice about it is number one, that it's free. So you can just go and just walk around the different paths for free. And it's very good for bird watching. And you can just walk along the Rio de la Plata, which is, I think, the widest river in the world. But if it's not the widest, it's very close to be the widest one. That's definitely a good kind of break from the intensity of the city.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned the expensive cafes that we were not going in to eat. So where are we going to eat?
There are many places. I think what I would like to do whenever I travel is always ask for recommendations for locals and see,
Sure.
okay, so which one is the place to eat that it's not very touristy? If you're in Puerto Madero, it's going to be expensive for sure. But if you go along Avenida de Mayo, you can find some off the beaten path places perhaps that are not very expensive and they have very good food. There is a place that I would like to recommend that it's called Pan y Teatro. So that's bread and theater. It's a very odd name for a restaurant. And it's a little like farther out. It's in a neighborhood called Boedo, which is not the most touristy place. It's a middle class neighborhood, but they have this very traditional Argentine cuisine. Because, well, I think everybody knows about when you think about Argentina, you think about meat. You think about the steak.
Gauchos and that culture, right?
It gets to a point that probably once you're tired of eating meat, you can go to this place, Pan y Teatro, like I mentioned, and you can eat more traditional Argentine food. They have empanadas, which they're like this pocket-shaped flaky crust filled with different type of things, usually ground beef with olives, and boiled egg is the most traditional one. There are tuna, ham and cheese. And they're delicious. They're very, very good. And it's something that you can eat. Like if you're in a rush, you can get a couple of those, and that will get you going for the rest of your day. And they have some other more traditional Argentine foods, like for example, locro, which is some type of stew made with hominy, and they put like different types of meat on it, chorizo. There's some more old-fashioned traditional Argentine type of foods that perhaps tourists don't even think about. I think you just cannot miss the Argentine barbecue, the asado. And what you need to know about the asado is like when we eat the cow, we eat pretty much everything. So it's not just that you are gonna eat a nice steak. If you ask for something that is called parrillada, which is a combination of different parts of the cow, you're gonna get your meat, your nice steak, but you also are going to get the kidney, you're going to get the intestines, you're going to get the blood sausage. So it might be worth trying it. I think some people, maybe I just made a mistake by telling you what really it is. Because, if I tell you that it's the kidney, then people will probably say, like, oh, I don't know what is this, but it tastes good. But now that you know that it's the kidney, maybe you will feel like, oh, I'm eating the cow's kidney. But yeah, we tend to eat pretty much everything that it comes out of the cow. And I think it's a very interesting experience. Definitely, if you go to Argentina, you must have an asado. That's for sure.
Excellent. Besides the fact that I may be eating a kidney and intestine, what's going to surprise me when I go to Argentina?
For people that don't really know the background about it, I think it comes back to a little bit what we were talking about at the beginning, which is like the strong European influence. Some people don't expect to find. Another thing, I think it's very well prepared for tourism. Like I said, like the metro system, it's very complex. It works when they are not on strike. It works very good, and I think connectivity among the city is definitely one of the most important things that it has to offer for tourism. You don't need a car at all. Don't even think about renting a car in Buenos Aires because you can go pretty much everywhere with the buses and the metro system. And I think that a thing that it will just probably strike you as very interesting is how open people are about tourism and how curious they are about knowing where you're from, knowing what you think about soccer, knowing what you think about politics. Some people might still ask you about Bush and say like, oh, what do you think about Bush? And Those people are trying to really know where you're from and what brought you to Argentina. Why did you pick Argentina?
Excellent. What time of year would you recommend for someone to travel to Buenos Aires?
The summer is very hot and humid, so I will definitely skip the summer for
And so we're
Buenos Aires.
talking January, February.
Exactly. I will just skip Buenos Aires from December all the way to late February.
Okay.
So if you're going on a trip to Argentina, that might be a good idea to actually visit Patagonia or other parts of the country, most preferably the southern part of the country, and then visit Buenos Aires during perhaps early March all the way to late May, and then maybe September to mid-November might be another good time to visit the city.
Okay. Is there a particular day of the year, the particular festival or holiday that would be just the best time to be in Argentina?
I think Christmas is very big in Argentina. So if you have the chance to go, the problem with that is
You're just in the middle of the summer that you just told us not to go.
if you can keep up with the humidity and the heat, that will be interesting because you see people like with fireworks and just being outside, whole families sometimes setting tables outside on the street and eating together. This, because of like safety issues, it's not happening that much, unfortunately, in the capital city anymore. But you can still see it in other places in Argentina. But yeah, I mean, and people just hang out until like 6 o'clock in the morning. It's a very interesting thing to see. And the other thing that I will just probably recommend for people to go, it's in the winter, is July 9th, which is our Independence Day. 2016 will be the 200th anniversary. So what they're doing every year now until 2016, they're doing like a lot of like cultural things. They have concerts in downtown center around 9th of July. So there's definitely a lot of things happening, and they're just bringing like different cultural aspects from different regions in Argentina. So you can try traditional food for different places of Argentina, see people dancing traditional type of dances. So going around 9th of July might be a good idea from here to 2016 because there are a lot of things happening in approaching the 200th anniversary of the independence.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned safety issues, so we have to talk about that briefly. What warning would you give? And we're talking about a big city here, so I think we'll have our usual know which neighborhoods to go to and which ones to avoid, but any specific cautions that you would give to a tourist going down to Buenos Aires?
I think you have to be very careful about any sort of like technology equipment that you have with you.
Okay.
Smartphones.
Knowing where it is at all times?
Knowing what it is at all times, and just if you're not using your phone, just keep it in your pocket. Just don't have it in your hand. I know that a lot of people uses it now, like to navigate the city. Just go to the tourist center and ask for a map because this type of things are still very expensive in Argentina. So there is a huge market for smartphones, which is it's kind of like means that it's a hot thing to pick for pickpocketers. So make sure you're careful about that. Just don't go walking around with your camera hanging from your neck.
Uh-oh, I'm in trouble now.
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, you'll be fine, but you don't want to show all the time the things that you have that perhaps still some people in Argentina may not be able to get. So you don't want to just be the center of attention.
Sure.
The other thing, like if you're like right in the subway, which for the most part is very safe, but sometimes it's very crowded. Just if you have your backpack, just make sure you put it on your chest. Then just don't put it on your backpack. I always do that, and I just always make sure that it's like very well sealed.
So you're mainly warning us about property crime, pickpockets, and things like that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's what it is. I mean,
Excellent. Okay.
You might have like people asking you for money, but a simple like no and just keep walking will do it. So I think Buenos Aires, for the most part, is a relatively safe city for tourism.
Okay. And in terms of language, obviously Spanish, the predominant language, but it sounds like you're saying you can get by even if you don't know a whole lot of Spanish.
Yes, I agree with you. I mean, and again, I think what we're exclusively talking about Buenos Aires, it might be a different story for the rest of Argentina.
Sure, right.
But in Buenos Aires, you'll be fine. Most young people, they have a decent knowledge of English. So you can definitely get by without speaking any Spanish at all. It might be difficult if you have some issues like I don't know, if you need to contact the police for some reason or you need to do some sort of like specific errand, that might become a little challenging. But for the most part, most people, they have a basic understanding of the English language. So it won't be a problem if you don't speak any Spanish.
Excellent. Now, at the beginning, you were talking about that it really doesn't depend on your budget, that there are less expensive places to stay in and they're a little higher end. Can you give us, if you were a backpacker, got a favorite hostel? You said you worked in one?
Yes. So I work in one, and the name of the hostel that I work for is called Portal del Sur. I really like this hostel because it's an old building. I think it's almost 100 years old. That used to be like old apartments, and Mabel, which is the owner of the hostel, actually just converted this place into a very beautiful hostel. It's like 4 stories, but it has only 2 or 3 different rooms per story. So it's not very big. And it has a very nice roof area that you have beautiful views of most of the downtown area of the city. And it's very strategically located. It's like a block and a half from one of the main pedestrian roads in Buenos Aires. And it's like 1 block away from the metro station. And they include breakfast with it. And they have actually a travel agent in the second floor, I believe, that it's
that's nice.
just to give tips and recommendations for travelers for things to do, not only in Buenos Aires, but in different areas of Argentina. There are so many hostels in Buenos Aires. I think we're close to like maybe 70 or 80 hostels.
Oh, my, okay.
I work in a hostel, and the hostel that I used to work for, if you just walk 1 block, there's another hostel right there that was part of Hosteling International. And if you walk 3 blocks the other way, there is another hostel. So it's a little bit too crowded. I think many of those, they actually did close now, probably, because at some point it was ridiculous the amount of hostels that we have. But definitely budget accommodation won't be an issue. And what I'm saying with this is probably you don't need any sort of reservation in advance on those kind of things. And most of the hostels in Argentina are very good. I have the chance to travel a lot around the world, and I feel that Argentine hostels they have very good quality.
Excellent. Now, we have some people who listen to the show, I know, who are done with hostels. they can't afford to stay in someplace a little nicer. Do you have any place that you would recommend if for somebody who's not looking for a hostel, but more of a different experience?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of like big hotel chains, but I think if you're looking for something a little more upscale or mid-range, there are a decent amount of bed and breakfasts. Most of these bed and breakfasts are not really located in the main downtown area of the city.
Residential area?
They're in residential areas like Palermo, which is a very nice neighborhood that I didn't talk about, but it has really a lot of things to offer. And the neighborhood has a lot of restaurants, bars, and nightlife. So it's not that you are in a purely residential area. There is a lot happening, but it's a more like upscale neighborhood.
And is Palermo, as it would appear to be from the name, an old Sicilian neighborhood?
Right. It's actually Palermo. It's a city in Sicily. So I think it takes the name from that city in Sicily. I'm not 100% sure, but it will be too much of a coincidence, especially what I said about the Italian influence that Argentina has. So yeah, it's spelled in the same way, Palermo. Yeah.
Excellent.
And, so there are a lot of boutique hotels and bed and breakfast that you can definitely check out online. And like I said, like accommodation, it's very good quality in the city of Buenos Aires.
Okay. And we're getting down to, I think, our last few questions. You're standing in the prettiest spot in Buenos Aires. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
I'm not going to mention the Delta and Tigre because that's technically outside the city.
Okay.
Probably I would say that I'm just in the ecological reserve that I mentioned before. Just walking around different paths and just enjoying the lagoons and the different birds and just looking at this massive river right in front of me.
Excellent. I think we're down to our last 3 questions. Before I get to them, is there anything in particular that you want us to know that we haven't covered already?
Yes, I think there's one more thing. There are just, like I said, like too many more things to do in Buenos Aires. But there's one thing that I think a lot of tourists might be interested in. Well, we mentioned tango, we mentioned steak, and the other thing that I think it's very famous about Buenos Aires is Evita.
Oh, so, yes. Sorry, and I didn't get there.
I think it might be worth visiting this Recoleta Cemetery, Cementerio de Recoleta, which actually offers, it's one of the few cemeteries in the world that actually offer tours.
Right.
So you can take a free tour in English or in Spanish and just see all this like very weird, interesting mausoleums from like all presidents of Argentina and the very, very rich people from the late 19th, early 20th century. Some people say that it's more expensive to rest in the Recoleta cemetery than to live your life in a fancy neighborhood in, for example, Palermo, because it used to be a very pricey place to be buried on. I don't think they're burying pretty much anybody else right now there. I think it's completely full. But yeah, you can just walk around all these different alleys and you will see most of these mausoleums are very old, so the windows are actually broken. So you can just peek in and see like all these dusty coffins inside of it. So it's a pretty unique experience. And of course, you can visit the place where Evita is buried, or at least supposedly buried. I think she's there, but there are some sort of myths associated with the fact that she might actually not be there. But yeah, it's definitely something worth visiting, especially because of how well known she is around the world.
And she might not actually be there. She might be somewhere else, or she's hanging out with Elvis.
I think, in all honesty, I'm confusing this with Perón, which was Evita's husband.
Right.
I think the myth relates to where Perón is buried, but I'm pretty sure Evita is there. I'm not huge in history, so I think I would like to take that back. And I think Evita is actually buried there. What we don't know is really where her husband
Got it.
actually buried.
Excellent. Last three questions. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Buenos Aires.
When you're just like going to work on Monday and you have one of your coworkers, which is a fan of a team that had a very crashing loss on the Sunday game, and he is just completely devastated on Monday and just cannot even put himself together because he's thinking about his team losing on Sunday night. I think those are things that I don't know if it happens in many other places in the world, maybe in some areas in Brazil, but I think it's something like quite unique about Buenos Aires.
Well, I'm not sure that I'm completely over the Giants 9-1 loss to the Dodgers yesterday, but I.
Well, you know, I'm an Oakland A's fan. I told you that, so a little bit of a Bay rivalry here.
Finish this sentence for me. You really know you're in Buenos Aires when what?
It's 8:30 p.m. You go to a restaurant. You get into the restaurant and you see that there's absolutely nobody there. You sit there, you eat your food, you leave by around 9:30, and the place is still completely empty. Because people in Argentina tend to actually have dinner very late, especially on weekends. So you don't see probably anybody in any restaurant until like 10:30 p.m. Sometimes people even go to eat at 11:30 p.m. So I think that that's something quite unique about Buenos Aires, and that sometimes perhaps confuses tourists a little bit, because I think, like, I don't know, mostly Americans are so used to it a little earlier, and when they get there and they see absolutely nobody, they say, what's wrong with this place? It's a little bit too early, that's all.
It's more of a Spanish schedule than an American schedule.
Yeah, it can be very similar to the Spanish schedule of eating.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize your home city of Buenos Aires in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
I will definitely use vibrant, complex, passionate.
Excellent. Leonardo, you don't have a travel blog per se, but I think you've offered that if people want more information, that you'd be glad to do an email exchange with them.
Sure, yeah. And my name is Leandro. My email address is Leandro, Leandro, @nmsu.edu.
Excellent. Leandro, thanks so much for coming on The Amateur Traveler and telling us about your beloved Buenos Aires.
Thanks a lot, Chris.
I did get an email from Leandro after we finished the interview. He had a certain, let's say, esprit d'escalier, a thought of something that he had failed to mention, and that is that Argentina applies a reciprocity tax to Australians, Canadians, and U.S. citizens. And what that means is a visa for the U.S. citizens is $160, and it's $160 because the visa for Argentinians to come to the U.S. is $160. And since last December, you do have to pay that fee in advance and not at the airport. Something good to know. I got an email this week with the world's nicest correction from Kaz, who first writes, "Hi, Chris, love your podcasts. Your questioning really draws out both good and bad features of a place, brings it alive, and I love how you seem so generally interested in all the places and all the guests' experiences, such a lovely manner. I often go to sleep with Amateur Traveler sending me on my travel dreams. As I'm going to Europe for 2 months later in the year, I have been avidly searching the podcasts for everything on Central Europe, Ireland, and Croatia, and yes, that's loads." Now, of course, the only thing I heard in that paragraph is that I put him to sleep. But seriously, Kaz then goes on to say, "But listening to your podcast on Southern Australia last night forced me to send you the correction, in case no other Aussie has yet done so. There is no such terminology as Southern Australia unless one is talking about some geographical landmass south of a latitude for some reason. E.g., there was a line drawn in World War II south of Brisbane, or maybe just north, that the Army had decided they would defend, leaving the rest to the Japanese as indefensible. I did not know that. Anyway, aside from such, we never use the term, the state is South Australia. Every time the guests mentioned Southern Australia, my mind jumped, where are they referring to? Oh yes, the state." And Kaz, I realized I had done that after we finished recording, and you'll notice that the episode was labeled South Australia, but yes, indeed, we did say Southern Australia many times during the episode, and I apologize to all our Australian listeners for that. And Kaz goes on, and yes, we do talk a lot about sharks. When I visited Western Australia, the state, okay, now that's just unfair that that's not West Australia, I'll have to say. When I visited Western Australia, the state, in November 2011, there were 3 shark fatalities in 3 weeks there. I certainly went dipping into the sea with one eye scanning vigilantly. Anyway, keep up the great work. Just had to make this little correction. No worries, mate. Kaz. And thanks very much for the world's nicest correction, Kaz. With that, I will remind you, if you're going to Argentina, to take advantage of the Via tours that we mentioned at the beginning of the show, amateurtraveler.com/tours, and we will bring this episode to a close. If you have any comments, feel free to send an email, as Kaz did, to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Chris2X, or join the Facebook community, facebook.com/amateurtraveler. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
Got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should